Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. Today, we're going to learn about inflation and what it is and how do we measure it. So, inflation, in the simplest way, if we define it, inflation is the general increase in prices. So, what we do is, as a government or as a nation, we are very interested in seeing how prices increase over time. This is important because let's say that I earn $100 per month. And let's say the only thing I can buy is in the market is bread. So bread is $1 per loaf. So if I want to buy bread, I go to the market. So then with $100, I can buy 100 loaves of bread. Now, if inflation happens, inflation means that prices went up. Now let's say bread price has increased to $2 per loaf. So now it is a little more expensive to buy bread. And let's say income increased from 100 to $120. So I should be happy, like my income went up by $20. However, now with $120, I can buy 60 loaves of bread. Now that's a problem. Before, even though my income was $100, it has gone up to $120. However, since price has gone up at a far greater percentage, so now I can actually buy fewer loaves of bread. So economists then say that we are now effectively poorer. So in this case, I will say nominal income, which is basically the dollar value of my income, increased from 100 to $120. However, I can buy fewer goods now because prices went up more. So my real income, which is the purchasing power of my income, decreased. So that's why we are very interested in measuring inflation, because we want to see that if I get a raise, am I able to buy more goods, or do I buy the same amount of goods? Or basically, is my standard of living improving? Because I can see here that, let's say if price doubled of bread, but my income increased by 20%, if I just think that, oh, wow, my income increased by 20%, I am much better off now. Well, prices are increasing at a much higher rate, so I'm effectively poorer. So how do we measure inflation? Now, inflation is measured again by a US government agency called the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Labor Statistics measures inflation in the US. In other nations, their statistical agencies measure it. In the US, inflation is measured monthly. So we get a number telling us every month what is the level of inflation. So what we do is, these are the steps that the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or BLS, uses to measure inflation. So the first step is, first we have to figure out a basket of goods. A basket of goods that a typical person consumes. And this is usually done by a survey. So once, maybe every 5 years or 10 years, a survey is done trying to figure out what is it that a typical person consumes in the US. And based on that basket, basically if it says like the basket has 5 apples and 10 tomatoes, then basically we will say this is what a person consumes typically in the US. Then what happens after that basket is fixed, the BLS collects the prices of those goods every month. Using those prices, the BLS then calculates the cost of purchasing that basket. So whatever is in that good, so if tomatoes cost $2 and oranges cost $3, and if those are the two things in my basket, then based on the amount I purchase, I put that in my basket and I find the average total cost of buying that basket. After that, the BLS fixes one of the years as the base year and then calculates the consumer price index, or what we call CPI. So the CPI, the formula is basically CPI equals cost of the basket in year T divided by the cost of the basket in the base year. Now the base year can be any year that they chose. Finally, after the CPI has been calculated, then we can now calculate inflation, which is the percentage change of CPI from one year to the next. So if I look at the formula of inflation, it will be, so inflation would be CPI of year T minus CPI of year T minus 1 divided by CPI of year T minus 1 times 100. So these are the steps we use to calculate inflation. Now let's look at an example. Let's say I have a basket, and in my basket I have 3 apples, 5 oranges, and 4 cups of coffee. So this is in my basket, and the CPI has determined that this is what a typical American consumes in a daily basis or a monthly basis. So we are going to now use this to find my inflation. So first is, let's say, the year, and let's say we go from 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. And we have price of apples, price of oranges, price of coffee, and so this is the total cost of the basket. So let's collect all this information so far. So let's say price of apple was $1, and then it went up to $1.20, and then $1.25, then $1.30. Oranges, maybe it was 50 cents, then it went up to 60 cents, then it went to 70, and then it remained at 70 cents. Price of coffee, probably 1 cup was $2, and then it went up to $2.1, then $2.2, and then it fell to $2.1 again. So what is the total cost of this basket? Since we fixed the basket already, basket has 3 apples, 5 oranges, and 4 cups of coffee. So in 2017, to buy this basket, I would need to spend 3 times 1 plus 5 times 0.5 plus 4 times 2. So the cost of my basket, to buy this basket, I would need to spend $13.50. Now in 2018, if I wanted to buy the same basket, I would need to spend 3 times 1.2. This is the cost of buying all the apples, plus 5 times 0.6 plus 4 times 2.1. So now, to buy that same basket, I need to spend $15. Now in 2019, I would spend 3 times 1.25 plus 5 times 0.7 plus 4 times 2.2. And it comes to $16.05. Finally, in 2020, I would spend 3 times 1.30 plus 5 times 0.7 plus 4 times 2.1. So it fell to 15.8. So now that we have the total cost of the basket, we need these. So this is what we need. The third step was, or after finding the cost, we needed to fix the base year and find the CPI. Let's say my base year, let's say my base year is 2018. So from that, now I can say CPI. If my base year is 2018, I would divide all the prices by the 2018 values times, and just to make it easier, I can multiply it by 100 so it doesn't look off. So I don't have to deal with decimals. I can just look at the big number. So then 15 divided by 15 times 100 would be 100. So for the base year, the CPI is always going to be 100. and then it will be 16.05 divided by 15 times 100. It's 107. And then finally, we have 15.8 divided by 15 times 100, which comes out to be 105.33. Let's make it that. Now finally, now we can calculate our inflation rate. So inflation for 2018 would be, if I bring back my formula from here, actually let's put it times 100 here just to make it easier, since we are multiplying everything by 100 just to make the numbers bigger. So inflation here would be my CPI in so if I wanted to find the inflation in 2018, it would be CPI in 2018 minus CPI in 2017 divided by CPI in 2017. So times 100. So if I were to do the plug in the values in this formula, let's just do that. So I would get, basically my answer would be 100 minus 90 divided by 90 times 100, which is equal to 11.1%. So now my inflation then is 11.1%. So we would say then, on an average, the general prices rose by 11.1% between 2017 and 2018. So if I were to find the inflation between 2019 and 2020, it would be 105.3 minus 107 divided by 107 times 100. So in this case, my inflation is actually negative. It's 1.58. So we would say that between 2019 and 2020, prices fell by 1.58%. Now, if prices fall, then we call it deflation. So deflation is when prices are falling. And inflation is when prices are rising. So we actually don't like deflation as much because deflation can be bad for the economy. Imagine you want to buy a house and the house is priced at $200,000. If you know that there is deflation, it means that next year the price will be cheaper. So you might want to wait. And if everyone's waiting before they make large ticket purchases, then spending falls and that affects GDP. Inflation, on the other hand, means prices are rising. So if you're looking at a $200,000 house and you're like, next year it would be more expensive, so I might as well not wait and buy it right now. So that would help to increase your spending. So now, where can we get inflation data for America? I can go to FRED. FRED is the Federal Reserve Economic Data. I click on that, and the one thing I want is CPI. I can just click on CPI, or I can search on FRED. And then it says Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers. We click on that. Or we can also click on Median Consumer Price Index. But basically, this is the one we use. Now, you might ask, why is it that it's only urban consumers? Well, that's how inflation is measured in the US. Now, before if I'm looking at CPI, I want to look at inflation. So one thing I need to do is convert the CPIs to percentage changes. So I can click on Edit Graph, and then I can go to the unit. I can say percent change from a year ago. And then once I do that, this is what my inflation rate looks like. So I can see that inflation in America has been rising and falling over time. So in November 1974, it was as high as 12%. It went to 14.6% in April 1980, which means compared to April 1979, prices were 14.6% higher, but then it fell. And usually the US government tries to keep the inflation between 2 to 3%. So you will see basically from the 90s till almost like until the 2020s, inflation was within that band for the most part, between 2 to 3%. But then after 2020, inflation shot up to 8.2%, as we see, but then we see that it continues to fall, and right now it is. They're saying that inflation is in May 2023, it's 4.12%, which means that prices in May 2023 rose by 4.12% compared to prices in May 2022. Problems with this measure of inflation. One is the basket is fixed and it is not representative of all of US. So, even though we take a survey and we try to find what is the average of all US residents, US is a huge country. There's over 330 million people living in the US, so it may not reflect the price changes for every individual. It shows a general increase in prices across the nation, but not of, let's say, a certain person living in rural Kansas or a certain person living in rural Arkansas. So the other problem is it does not account for substitution of goods, which means that let's say that, beef price went up. Then a lot of people will substitute beef for chicken or other protein source or fish because those may be cheaper. But in inflation, when calculating our CPI, we don't really take that into account. So the cost of the basket, if the basket cost was basically like, I need protein, then that would probably take that into account. But if it says that people consume 3 pounds of beef every month, then if beef prices went up, that will be reflected in CPI, but people may substitute away from beef to buying something else. Also, it does not consider improvements in quality. So over time, things may get better in quality, and you have that improvement in quality may not be reflected in price. So imagine something like cell phones. If you buy a smartphone is definitely more expensive than a regular brick cell phone. So in that case, there is improvements in quality. People are paying more for that product, but CPI would just say, yes, inflation is there because if cell phone is in the basket, the price has gone up. Now, the other thing is, since new products are not included in the basket. So, the basket is revised, but it's revised maybe once every 5 years or 10 years. So if new products are introduced in the market during that time period and it's more, and people want to use those products or those products are popular, then their price changes are not reflected in CPI. But even with that, CPI helps us to understand how prices are changing and whether the purchasing power of individuals is increasing or decreasing. So it helps us to figure out that this is why, it helps us to figure out what's happening with prices. Are people getting richer are we able to buy more goods and services with our income over time? Another thing that CPI helps us to do is it helps us to convert nominal dollars to real dollars. As we saw in the example initially, it's like nominal dollar is basically the dollar value of your income. Real dollar tells us what is the purchasing power of your income. So when a lot of times people say income in 1960 could buy me a house and a car. Now the same income cannot do so. So if I say that $10,000, let's say I earned $10,000 a year in 1960, it could help me buy a house and a car. Now the same $10,000 cannot do so. Well, yes, that is true, but in nominal terms, your income hasn't changed, but prices has rose. So in real terms, your dollar's value has fallen, so your income is not the same. So one thing we may want to do is find out, let's say if my grandfather earned $10,000 a year in 1960, and I earn $60,000 today in, let's say, 2022, am I better off than my grandfather? Now, someone would say, well, you are earning 6 times more than your grandfather. So nominal income is 6 times more, but is real income higher? That is what we are trying to figure out. Or basically, in other words, can your grandfather buy more goods and services using $10,000 than you using $60,000? This is what we have to figure out. So let's say that we then need to use CPI to find it. So we go back to our consumer price index data. We don't need the percentage change again. So what I will do is I will go back to edit graph here and I will convert it to the index. So then I'll just take January of 1960 data. So we have January of 1960, it was 29.37. So these are the CPI values I found from Fred. So this should be in January of 1960 and January of 2022. Now, with this, we can convert $1960 to $2022. How do we do that? So let's say that we can use just using words to figure that out. So in 1960, CPI was 29.37, and in 2022, it is 282.59. So I can write the same thing down here. So in 1960, if CPI was, I don't need that. If CPI is now 1, then in 2022, it would be 282.59 divided by 29.37. So now in 1960, if income was 10,000, then in 2022, it is, so we would just multiply this number with 10,000, which comes out to be 96,217. So what this is telling me is that let me write it down here. So in 1960, if, let's say, I spent all my $10,000 to buy a certain basket of goods. Now, to buy that same basket in 2022, I would need to spend $96,217. So let's say, and this basket could be anything. It could be it could have a house, car, your grocery, tuition for your children, and all that. So in 1960, $10,000 would buy a certain basket of goods, and to buy that same equivalent basket of goods in 2022, you would need to spend $96,000. So if you are earning $60,000, then yes, you are effectively poorer than your grandfather in 1960. So yeah, if we convert real dollars, even though my income is 6 times more than my grandfather's income in nominal terms, in real terms, I'm actually earning $36,000 less. So if we want to compare dollar values from one year to the next, we have to convert them to equivalent to dollars, or we have to basically remove the effect of price increases. And so that is going to tell me that, yes, and in this respect, yes, I am earning less than my grandfather. So this is one way we use inflation. We convert nominal dollars to real dollars so that we can compare how has our purchasing power changed over time. Hopefully this was helpful, and hopefully this helped you to understand why measuring inflation is important. I will see you at a later video. Have a good day. Goodbye.